Global equity markets have rallied 20%. Yes, my next guest says there are investors, including advisors, that are still waiting for the dust to settle. What are the signals that our investors are waiting for to dive in? Will Hamilton from Hamilton Wealth Partners joins me now. Will, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Danielle.
It is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you reminded me the last time we spoke.
Yep.
We're talking around December. We thought it might have been time for a bit of a breather in markets. And yet we've seen some of the strongest performance in markets over the last 2-3 months.
Well, since the beginning of November, they've rallied on an all countries world index for the MSCI well over 20%. And yeah, you're right. When we were prior to Christmas, we were sort of saying, we might see a breather. It tried in January, then kept going. It tried in February, then Nvidia's result came out. It sort of tried again in the last few days, but then the CPI figures came out last night. I think that what's going to happen, and there are a lot of people sitting on the sidelines. What worries me is this rally will keep going, and then they'll get in when interest rates fall, and that's going to be we're going to be 70-80% of the way through. But the market is, it does need to take a breather. Nothing goes up in a straight line.
No, nothing does go up in a straight line. What do you think has underpinned this exuberance? Is it liquidity? Is just people discounting rate cuts, or were earnings not as bad or slightly better than expected?
I think it's a combination of actually everything you just mentioned. I think there is liquidity, but there is still also a lot of liquidity on the sidelines. There is that anticipation that interest rates will come down. We are at or near the peak. I know Jamie Dimon saying just be careful. There could be, upside risk. But the markets are pricing in a cut in June, in the US that is, not in Australia. And then, these results like Nvidia, they are for real. And I think the other thing is people are seeing productivity improvements in the US. Now this isn't extrapolating across globally on AI, but you are seeing it in the US. And capital economics are saying this could be in the order of 1.5%.
Right, to GDP growth?
GDP growth, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading an article in the FT saying that the US has just moved ahead of Europe in terms of productivity. So what's holding back countries like Australia, like Europe, when it comes to productivity growth and potentially starting to embed generative AI and AI into our business systems?
So I think a lot of countries, Europe is a good example where they're worried about job losses. So they're trying to regulate the way out of the productivity improvements, so to speak. And you're also seeing, like the ACT you were talking about, the potential of job losses here. We haven't seen the legislation on that side, but that would be a shame because one thing I think the big debate out there on Australia is the lack of productivity, and AI can deliver productivity.
So let's jump into the AI theme, because you were telling me earlier you've been exposed to a lot of presentations recently. What level of skepticism is there towards this new megatrend, secular trend?
Huge. I was recently at a conference outside of Melbourne, probably 3 weeks ago, and what really surprised me was it's not just the investors, but also some of the professionals advising these investors, where there is a level of skepticism, and there's a hesitation, and that's why I'm worried that it will be when interest rates actually fall that people jump as well.
Very interesting. Were you early to the 1995 internet, secular theme? Can you remember that far back?
I can't remember that far back. I was just in Hong Kong in those days, so that's a long time ago.
Still doing Asian equities at that stage, and obviously pre the LTCM blow up. Yeah. Just looking at the question mark over how narrow the rally has or has not been in markets, and whether or not it will push out to other geographic locations like the cheaper markets such as Europe. I mean, Australia, I think some people have been quite surprised by the rally that we've seen here.
So you have seen a rally here of near 15%. So, but it's less than global markets, and I think that's one, and there's a reason why, and that's the structure of the index. But if you look at the indicators, and again, Capital have been showing these on momentum and on growth, you have a strong bias now towards growth, and momentum has really kicked in. So yes, I think it will broaden, and anything with growth that growth bias, I think, will do very well. But just because something's underperformed doesn't mean it's going to rally. And I think that's a trap that you have to be very careful about.
Can markets like Japan and India continue to do well given their outperformance?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt. India is a true growth market. Yes, when you are in that growth phase, you can become expensive. But at the same time, you have earnings per share growing, GDP growth as well, and they are growth markets. Yeah.
I was listening a little bit earlier this morning. The fact that the Internet ETF KWEB in the US, the China Internet ETF, it's starting to perform again, and of course there's been so much focus on the fact that Chinese equities have just really disappointed. Is there upside potential in some of those Chinese technology names at this point in the cycle?
Yeah, it's interesting. One guy at work, he does look at some of those and very carefully, and says that there's a lot of what he calls real businesses there. So they're not branded with the SEO, so SOE, state-owned enterprise sort of label, and they've got real earnings. I think China, and we've talked about this, I actually think it is going to outperform a little bit, but you've got to get out.
Yeah. And
we use managers in emerging markets that have, they are underweight China, and we've actually been warning our clients, look, these funds have done really, really well, but they might underperform a little bit if China pops. That doesn't worry me, because the one thing about China is, yes, you can always buy, but you've got to sell.
Indeed. So you've been positioned into these rallies. You've been able to benefit from them. Where to from here?
Look, I think for 2024, if we go point to point, I'm optimistic. Still optimistic for being exposed to risk-based assets and being exposed to global equities. However, nothing, as I said before, goes up in a straight line. I think that this has been an astounding rally. I'm surprised by the extent of it, even though we went overweight in October. But I've been astounded by the extent of this rally, and I just wouldn't surprise me if we just got a pullback, 5 to 10%, maybe closer to 10%, and that's healthy.
Is that a buy the correction moment or buy the dip moment?
Yeah, I definitely would, because as I said, I think point to point, I'm optimistic about equities for 2024.
Do you see a rotation into more cyclical sectors and the like? I was chatting to Michael Howell yesterday, and he's of the belief that we're somewhere around 60% through this liquidity rally. And tech typically moves first when it comes to these liquidity rallies. Then it rotates round. Is that something you will be looking at?
As I said, it could broaden, but I'm not of the argument just because something's underperformed means it's got to pop up. And it's got to have earnings. Those earnings have to be growing, and therefore growth is a theme.
Okay, before you go, we have discussed private credit a lot over the last few months.
We have.
It is showing no signs of slowing down. If anything, that trend just continues to gather momentum. Are you still possibly concerned that there may be some air pockets there down the track?
I think there's a disparity in the quality of private credit managers. I did have a smile. This conference I talked about out of Melbourne about 3 weeks ago, someone was up on stage, actually that you interview regularly, I think it was James Weir, and he said, the last thing we, being the wealth management industry, want to see is another private credit manager at the moment. I agree with him 100%.
So a contrarian indicator. Fantastic, Will. As always, thank you so much for joining The Wealthy Effect.
You're welcome. Thank you, Danny.